The moment I heard the 911 dispatcher's voice through my Ring doorbell camera saying, "Ma'am, changing your own door locks is not a crime," while watching Deborah Hendris sputter and demand police intervention, I knew this woman's reign of terror over Willow Creek Estates was about to come to a spectacular end. But getting to that beautiful moment of karmic justice required 6 months of meticulous documentation, legal research that would make a law student weep, and the kind of patience I'd developed over 20 years as a high school history teacher dealing with difficult parents. What Deborah didn't know, when she first knocked on my door 3 days after I moved in, clipboard in hand and that trademark condescending smile plastered on her face, was that I'd grown up in a family of lawyers. My sister was a civil rights attorney, and I had an encyclopedic knowledge of Texas property law thanks to a nasty divorce 5 years earlier that taught me to never again be ignorant about my legal rights. This is the story of how an HOA president's delusional power trip, culminating in a false 911 call over door locks, led to criminal charges, a lawsuit that cost her everything, and the liberation of an entire Texas neighborhood from a tyrant who genuinely believed she owned other people's private property. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 44 years old, and after teaching American history at Reagan High School in Houston for 2 decades, I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in Willow Creek Estates, a planned community about 30 miles outside the city in Fort Bend County. The house was perfect for my needs. Nothing fancy, just 1,800 square feet, with a small backyard, 2 bathrooms, and most importantly, it was mine, after years of renting following my divorce. My teenage son Marcus, who was 16 and starting his junior year, would finally have his own room instead of sharing space in our cramped apartment. My elderly mother, who I'd been caring for since her stroke 2 years prior, would have the ground-floor bedroom with the accessible bathroom. The neighborhood looked peaceful when we toured it in early June. Well-maintained homes in that cookie-cutter suburban style, kids riding bikes, American flags on porches, the whole Norman Rockwell aesthetic. The HOA seemed standard from the paperwork. $85 monthly dues, rules about lawn maintenance, no RVs or boats parked in driveways, architectural approval needed for exterior changes. I'd lived under HOA rules before at an apartment complex, so I figured I knew what to expect. Follow the reasonable rules, pay your dues, keep your property nice, and everyone leaves you alone. I was so naive. I met Deborah Hendris on my 4th day in the house, which was a sweltering Saturday in mid-June, when Marcus and I were unloading the last boxes from the U-Haul. She materialized in my driveway at 9:37 a.m. I remember the time because I'd just checked my phone, driving a pristine white Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than my annual salary. She was maybe 55, with that over-processed blonde hair helmet that defies humidity, wearing cream-colored linen pants and a pastel pink blouse, despite it being moving day in Texas summer heat, and carrying the infamous clipboard that I'd later learn struck fear into half the neighborhood. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she announced, not asked, as she approached. "I'm Deborah Hendris, HOA President and Architectural Review Committee Chair. I like to personally greet all new residents to ensure they understand our community standards." Her smile had all the warmth of a corporate HR manager about to announce layoffs. For the next 35 minutes, yes, 35 minutes when I was trying to move furniture, she lectured me about the rules. Grass must be cut weekly to a height between 2 and 3 inches. Trash cans must be stored out of sight, except on collection days. No decorations except during approved holiday periods, and even then subject to taste guidelines. All exterior paint colors must be pre-approved from the official palette of 12 shades of beige and gray. No vegetable gardens visible from the street. No basketball hoops. No yard signs except for sale signs. No solar panels without architectural approval. She informed me that she personally drives through the neighborhood every Tuesday and Friday morning to identify violations, and that she takes great pride in maintaining property values. My teaching instincts, honed by years of identifying bullies and power trippers, were screaming warnings. I'd seen this personality type before, the parent who volunteers for every committee not to help, but to control, who weaponizes rules to feed their ego, who mistakes authority for respect. But I was exhausted, sweating through my moving clothes, and just wanted her to leave. "I'll review the CCNRs carefully," I promised, hoping to end the conversation. "Oh, you'll do more than review them," she said, and her smile turned sharp. "You'll live by them. I've foreclosed on 3 properties in the last 4 years for non-compliance, and I have no problem doing it again." She actually said that, threatened foreclosure before I'd even finished moving in. Marcus, who'd been listening from the porch, caught my eye and mouthed, "She's crazy," and I had to suppress a laugh. After Deborah finally left, my neighbor Tom from next door wandered over with a sympathetic look and 2 cold bottles of water. Tom was a retired petroleum engineer in his late 60s, friendly and soft-spoken, who'd lived in Willow Creek for 8 years. "She got to you already, huh?" he said. "Listen, best advice I can give you. Stay off her radar. Don't give her any reason to notice you. She's made life hell for a lot of people in this neighborhood." He told me about the Patels 3 streets over who had been fined $3,000 for planting roses in their front yard that were supposedly the wrong shade of pink. The Johnsons, who had been forced to repaint their entire house twice because Deborah claimed the approved accessible beige they'd used looked too tan in certain light. And old Mr. Chen, who'd been threatened with a lien for having a small Buddha statue in his garden that Deborah deemed religious iconography, that violated the aesthetic guidelines. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" I asked. Tom sighed. "She owns 4 properties in the neighborhood, bought them as investments over the years. That gives her 4 votes in HOA elections. Plus, she's got 2 other board members who are afraid of her. The rest of us just try to stay out of her way. The last person who challenged her, she made their life so miserable they ended up selling at a loss and moving out of state." For the first 6 weeks, I followed Tom's advice and kept my head down. I paid my HOA dues the day they were due. I mowed my lawn every Saturday morning at exactly 2.5 inches. I kept my trash cans in the garage except on collection days. I didn't hang any decorations or plant anything without checking the rules first. I was the model of compliance, and Deborah left me alone, though I'd occasionally see her white Mercedes crawling through the neighborhood on her violation patrol, and she'd stare at my house like a hawk watching for mice. Then came the incident that started everything, and it was so absurd, I almost couldn't believe it was happening. In late July, I decided to change my front door locks. This wasn't some dramatic statement or rule violation. My realtor had recommended it as standard practice when buying any home because you never know how many copies of the old keys might be floating around from previous owners, contractors, or real estate agents. I'd bought a nice brushed nickel deadbolt set from Home Depot for $89, watched a YouTube tutorial, and spent a Saturday morning installing it. The new hardware looked better than the old brass locks anyway, and everything was finished by noon. I was inside making lunch when my Ring doorbell chimed. Deborah was standing on my porch, and she did not look happy. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, genuinely confused about what could possibly be wrong. "What did you do to your door?" she demanded, pointing at my new locks like I'd spray-painted obscenities on the front of my house. "I changed the locks," I said slowly, wondering if this was a trick question. "New homeowner, recommended by my realtor, standard security practice." Her face flushed red. "Did you get architectural approval?" I blinked. "Approval? To change my own locks? On my own door? That I own?" Section 4.7 of the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions states that any exterior modifications require written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, she said, her voice dripping with condescension like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a slow child. "That includes door hardware." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're joking. You're telling me I need HOA permission to change the locks on my own house?" "Exterior aesthetics are governed by the HOA," she said. "Those locks are visible from the street. You'll need to submit an architectural modification request form. Wait for committee review, which takes up to 30 business days, and if approved, you may proceed. Until then, you need to reinstall the original hardware or face fines of $100 per day." I felt my blood pressure rising. I'd dealt with difficult administrators and unreasonable parents for 2 decades, but this was beyond anything I'd experienced. "Deborah, I'm not removing locks from my house. That's a security issue. These locks are standard residential hardware, they match my door, and they're completely innocuous. There's no rational reason I need permission for this." "The rules are the rules," she said, and that infuriating smile appeared again. "I'll expect compliance within 48 hours, or the fines begin. Have a nice day, Sarah." She turned and walked away before I could respond. That evening, I did what I should have done before moving in. I sat down and read every single page of the Willow Creek Estates CC&Rs, which was a 47-page document written in dense legalese that could cure insomnia. Section 4.7 did indeed state that exterior modifications required architectural approval, but it specifically listed examples: paint colors, roofing materials, fencing, decks, patios, sheds, and landscaping features. Door hardware wasn't mentioned. More importantly, I discovered that Section 4.7 included a provision stating that routine maintenance and in-kind replacements not materially altering the exterior appearance were exempt from approval requirements. Replacing worn locks with similar standard locks seemed to fall clearly under that exemption. I also noticed something else interesting. Multiple sections of the CC&Rs referenced procedures and requirements that directly conflicted with Texas property code, particularly sections dealing with fines, liens, and foreclosures. Texas has some of the strongest property rights laws in the country, and the HOA statutes under Texas Property Code, Chapter 209, impose strict requirements on HOAs that these CC&Rs seemed to ignore. I sent Deborah a polite email that evening citing Section 4.7's exemption for routine maintenance, explaining that replacing locks with substantially similar hardware didn't constitute a modification requiring approval, and respectfully declining to remove my new locks. I kept the tone professional and included photos showing the old brass locks versus the new brushed nickel ones, virtually identical in style, just newer and shinier. Her response came at 11:43 p.m. "Your interpretation is incorrect. Architectural approval is required. You have 48 hours. This is your final warning." No legal reasoning, no explanation, just pure assertion of authority. The next morning, Sunday, I called my sister Rebecca, the civil rights attorney in Austin. I read her the relevant CC&R sections and explained the situation. She was silent for a moment, then started laughing. "Sarah, this woman has absolutely no legal authority to demand you remove locks from your house. Even if the CC&Rs required approval, which it sounds like they do not for routine maintenance, an HOA can't enforce rules that violate property owners' basic rights to secure their homes. That would be unconscionable and potentially unconstitutional." Texas Property Code Section 209.06 specifically prohibits HOAs from including or enforcing provisions that are illegal or unconscionable. Denying homeowners the right to secure their property with locks definitely qualifies. So what do? I asked. Document everything, Rebecca said. Save every email, every letter, every interaction. If she actually tries to fine you, don't pay it. Paying even once can be seen as accepting the validity of the charge. If she escalates, we'll respond with a cease and desist letter citing the specific statutes she's violating. And Sarah? People like this don't stop at one incident. She's going to keep pushing until you either break or push back hard enough to make her stop. From what you've told me, she's probably violated Texas HOA law in dozens of ways already. Start paying attention. 48 hours later, I received my first violation notice. In the mail, a formal letter on HOA letterhead stating I was being fined $100 per day, effective immediately, for unauthorized exterior modification of my door locks. The letter included a demand for immediate payment of $200, covering the 2 days that had elapsed since her initial visit, and warned that fines would continue to accrue daily until compliance. It also stated that unpaid fines would result in a lien against my property and potential foreclosure proceedings. I took photos of the letter, saved the envelope with the postmark, and filed it carefully. I did not pay. I also started doing what I do best as a history teacher: research. I spent the next 2 weeks diving deep into Texas HOA law, and what I discovered was genuinely shocking. Under Texas Property Code, Section 209-215, HOAs are required to give owners detailed written notice before assessing fines, including the specific rule violated, the amount of the fine, and information about the owner's right to request a hearing. Deborah's notice didn't include hearing information. Section 209-007 requires HOAs to adopt and make available written policies for giving notice and conducting hearings regarding violations. I checked with Tom and 2 other neighbors, and nobody had ever seen such policies. Section 209-008 limits the circumstances under which HOAs can place liens on properties, and Section 209-091 requires HOAs to send specific warning notices before filing liens. Most importantly, I discovered that Texas courts have repeatedly held that HOA rules must be reasonable, applied uniformly, and enforced in good faith, and that selective or arbitrary enforcement can invalidate violations. I started talking to neighbors more deliberately, asking careful questions about their experiences with the HOA and Deborah specifically. What I learned painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse and selective enforcement. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow 4 houses down, told me she'd been fined $500 for having her grandson's car parked in her driveway during his month-long visit, even though at least 8 other homes regularly had multiple vehicles in driveways without consequence. The Nguyens had been cited for having a non-conforming mailbox, even though their mailbox was identical to 15 others on our street. Deborah just didn't like them, because they'd questioned a special assessment she'd pushed through to repave her own street section. Young couple Dylan and Amanda 3 doors down had been threatened with fines for having their recycling bin visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was in their own garage with the door open while they cleaned. The pattern was crystal clear. Deborah targeted people she perceived as weak, different, or insufficiently deferential to her authority. She ignored identical violations by homeowners who kissed up to her or kept quiet. And she used the threat of fines, liens, and foreclosure to bully people into submission. I also learned something else crucial. Deborah had been using her position for financial benefit in ways that skirted the edge of legality, if not crossing it outright. She owned a property management company called Hendris Property Solutions, And 3 years earlier, she'd gotten the board to approve a contract hiring her own company to handle HOA administrative duties for $2,500 per month. Nobody had thought to question this obvious conflict of interest, or noticed that the HOA was now paying her company $30,000 per year for work that had previously been done by volunteer board members. By mid-August, my alleged fines had reached $3,200 according to the monthly statements Deborah kept sending, though I hadn't paid a penny. I'd also received 2 additional violation notices, one for having a small package delivery box on my porch overnight, citing unapproved receptacles, and another for Marcus's bicycle being visible in our garage when the door was open, citing unsightly storage. Both were absurd, both were selectively enforced, and both clearly constituted harassment. I documented everything, took dated photos showing multiple neighbors with the same violations, and continued to ignore the fines. Then Deborah made the mistake that would ultimately destroy her. On the morning of August 18th, I'd taken a personal day from work to take my mother to a doctor's appointment. Marcus was at school. I'd decided to upgrade the back door lock as well, since the old one was sticky and difficult for my mother to operate with her limited hand mobility. I bought another matching brushed nickel deadbolt set, and around 10 a.m. I was in my backyard, door propped open, new lock partially installed, hardware scattered on my patio table, when I heard shouting from my front yard. I walked around the side of the house and found Deborah standing in my driveway, phone to her ear, and I heard her say the words that would change everything. "Yes, 911. I need police at 847 Maple Ridge Drive immediately. The homeowner is breaking into the house and changing the locks without authorization. She's violating HOA regulations, and I need her removed from the property right now." My jaw dropped. She was calling 911, emergency services, for locks, on my own house. "Deborah, what the hell are you doing?" I said, loud enough that she definitely heard me. She turned, saw me standing there, and didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm having you removed from this property for unauthorized modifications," she said. "This has gone on long enough. I own this neighborhood, and you're going to learn to follow the rules." "You own this neighborhood?" I repeated, genuinely stunned by the delusion. "Deborah, I own this house. I have a deed, a mortgage, and legal title to this property. You're calling 911 because I'm installing locks on my own doors." "You don't have permission," she practically shrieked, her face turning that particular shade of red that suggests dangerously high blood pressure. "I am the HOA president, and I have the authority to determine what modifications are acceptable." The 911 dispatcher was apparently still on the line, because I could hear a faint voice coming from Deborah's phone saying something. Deborah pressed the phone back to her ear and said, "Yes, she's here right now, and she's refusing to comply with HOA regulations. I need officers here immediately." My Ring doorbell was recording all of this from the front porch, video and audio. I made a mental note to save that footage immediately. I pulled out my own phone and started recording as well. "Ma'am, for the record," I said clearly into my phone's camera, "I am Sarah Mitchell. I am the legal owner of this property at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, and I am installing new locks on my own doors for security purposes. This woman, Deborah Hendris, has called 911 to report this lawful activity on my private property." Deborah looked furious that I was recording, but she couldn't exactly stop me from documenting her public behavior on my own property. We stood there in the most absurd standoff for about 8 minutes until a Fort Bend County Sheriff's patrol car pulled up. 2 deputies got out, a younger male officer and a female officer who looked to be in her 40s. Deborah immediately rushed over to them, talking rapidly about HOA violations and unauthorized modifications, and how I was destroying property values. The female deputy, whose nameplate read Sergeant Martinez, held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. What exactly is the emergency here?" "She changed her door locks without HOA approval," Deborah said, pointing at me like I'd committed murder. "She's been racking up fines for weeks, and now she's changing more locks. And I need you to make her stop and remove the unauthorized hardware." Sergeant Martinez looked at me, looked at my house, looked back at Deborah, and I could see her mentally processing how ridiculous this was. "Ma'am, is this your house?" she asked me. "Yes, officer," I said. "I'm the legal owner. I have the deed inside if you need to see it." "And what are you doing?" "Installing new door locks that I purchased from Home Depot for security purposes," I said. "Standard residential hardware, no different from what was there before." Sergeant Martinez turned back to Deborah. "Ma'am, changing locks on your own property is not a crime. This is a civil HOA matter, not a criminal issue. We can't intervene in HOA disputes." "But she's violating the CCNRs," Deborah protested. "She owes thousands in fines. She's destroying the neighborhood. That's something you'll need to address through your HOA's proper procedures or civil court," the sergeant said, her tone suggesting this was far from the first idiotic HOA call she'd responded to. "Making a 911 call for a non-emergency can result in charges for misuse of emergency services." That's when Deborah made her second catastrophic mistake of the day. "I know your supervisor," she said, her voice taking on that entitled tone of someone used to getting their way through connections. "Chief Deputy Harrison and I go way back. I think he'd be very interested to know that his officers are refusing to enforce property violations." Sergeant Martinez's expression went ice cold. "Ma'am, are you threatening me with my supervisor because I won't arrest someone for the non-crime of changing their own locks?" "I'm simply saying that I have connections, and I expect proper enforcement of the law," Deborah said. The younger deputy was trying not to smirk. Sergeant Martinez pulled out a citation book. "Ma'am, what's your name?" she asked Deborah. "Deborah Hendris, and I'm the HOA president, and I—" "Ms. Hendris, I'm citing you for misuse of 911 services under Texas Penal Code Section 42-061, Martinez said, writing rapidly. "Making a false report to emergency services for a non-emergency situation is a Class B misdemeanor. You have the right to contest this citation in court. Your court date is listed at the bottom." Deborah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You're citing me? I'm the victim here." "Ma'am, changing your own door locks is not a crime," Martinez said tiredly. "This was never an appropriate use of emergency services. If you have an HOA dispute, handle it through proper civil channels." She handed Deborah the citation and turned to me. "Ma'am, you're free to continue your home maintenance. If she continues to harass you on your property, you can file for a criminal trespass warning or a restraining order. Have a good day." The deputies got back in their car and left. Deborah stood in my driveway, holding the citation, her face now more purple than red. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "I will foreclose on this house if it's the last thing I do. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, Deborah, I think you have no idea who you're dealing with," I said calmly, "but you're about to find out." She stormed back to her Mercedes and peeled out of my driveway fast enough to leave rubber marks. The moment she was gone, I went inside and did 3 things. First, I downloaded and saved the Ring doorbell footage showing the entire 911 call and the deputy's response. Second, I called Rebecca and told her everything, including Deborah's direct threat to foreclose on my house. Third, I started systematically documenting every single interaction, violation notice, and communication from Deborah over the past 2 months. Rebecca was practically gleeful. Sarah, she called 911 over door locks. She got cited for misuse of emergency services. She threatened a sheriff's sergeant, and she threatened foreclosure over $3,200 in invalid fines for a non-violation. She's handed you everything we need for a harassment claim, and possibly criminal stalking charges under Texas Penal Code Section 42.072. What should I do? I asked. I'm coming down this weekend, Rebecca said. We're going to draft a cease and desist letter that will make her think twice about ever contacting you again. And then we're going to request a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances, because I guarantee that if she's this brazen about abusing her authority, she's been stealing from the HOA. People like this always are. That weekend, Rebecca arrived with her briefcase, her laptop, and a determination that reminded me why she'd never lost a civil rights case. We spent Saturday drafting a comprehensive cease and desist letter that was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It detailed every violation of Texas property code that Deborah had committed. Failing to provide proper notice before assessing fines, failing to establish policies for hearings, imposing unconscionable rules that violated property rights, selective enforcement of rules threatening foreclosure without following required procedures, conflicts of interest in hiring her own company, and misuse of HOA funds. The letter demanded that all fines against me be immediately withdrawn, that Deborah cease all contact with me except through written communication regarding legitimate HOA business, and that the HOA provide a complete financial audit by an independent CPA within 30 days. It concluded by noting that failure to comply would result in civil litigation and potential criminal complaints for theft, abuse of official capacity, and harassment. We sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested, and also emailed it to Deborah and the other 2 HOA board members. Deborah's response came 3 days later, and it was exactly what we expected. She doubled down. Her email was unhinged. Your baseless threats don't scare me. I have the full authority of the HOA behind me, and I will not be bullied by some teacher who thinks she knows the law. Your fines now total $4,100 and continue to accrue. Pay immediately or face foreclosure proceedings. This is your final warning. She'd also sent another violation notice, this time claiming my garden hose being visible in my yard constituted outdoor storage of equipment, in violation of aesthetic standards. Rebecca read the email, shook her head, and said, "She's either completely delusional or the worst poker player in history. She's giving us documentation of continued harassment after a formal cease and desist. That's evidence of malice." Over the next month, I focused on building a coalition in the neighborhood. I'd learned from teaching that systemic change requires collective action, not just individual heroes. I organized a meeting at Tom's house with every neighbor who'd been targeted by Deborah. 12 families showed up, and every single one had a horror story. Mrs. Patterson brought documentation of $2,300 in fines for her grandson's car. The Nguyens had been fined $1,800 for their mailbox. Dylan and Amanda had racked up $950 in fines for various absurd violations. In total, the families in that room represented over $15,000 in questionable fines that Deborah had assessed in just the past 2 years. I explained what Rebecca and I had discovered about Texas HOA law and how virtually all of these fines were invalid because Deborah hadn't followed proper procedures. I showed them the statutes requiring notice, hearings, and written policies. I explained how her selective enforcement invalidated the violations, and I proposed a plan. We would collectively refuse to pay invalid fines. We would demand a special meeting of homeowners to review the HOA's finances and governance, and we would petition to recall the board if necessary. The response was overwhelming. Everyone was ready to fight. Tom volunteered to draft the petition for a special meeting. The Nguyens, who owned a small business, offered to pay for a real HOA attorney to review our case. Dylan worked in IT and offered to help organize all our documentation into a comprehensive database. We were no longer individual targets. We were an organized resistance. We submitted our petition for a special meeting on September 22nd, signed by 34 homeowners, well over the 25% threshold required by Texas Property Code, Section 209-256. Under the statute, the board was required to call the meeting within 30 days. Deborah tried to ignore it. On October 8th, after 15 days of silence, Rebecca sent another letter, this time on her law firm's letterhead, noting that failure to call the required meeting within the statutory time frame was a violation of Texas Property Code and that we would petition a court to compel the meeting if necessary. Deborah finally scheduled the meeting for October 28th, and you could tell from her curt email that she was furious. The night of the meeting, the Willow Creek Community Center was packed. Normally, HOA meetings attracted maybe 10 people if you were lucky. This time, more than 60 homeowners showed up, which represented more than half the neighborhood. The energy in the room was electric. People were angry, and they were done being silent. Deborah sat at the board table with her 2 loyalist board members, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She tried to control the meeting with procedural tactics, claiming we needed to follow Robert's Rules of Order, limiting comment time, insisting on a formal agenda. Tom, who'd been elected as meeting spokesperson by our coalition, calmly invoked Texas Property Code Section 209-051, which gives homeowners the right to speak at open meetings, and noted that since this was a special meeting called by petition, the homeowners who called it had the right to set the agenda. For the next 2 hours, homeowner after homeowner stood up and told their stories. Mrs. Patterson, her voice shaking with emotion, described how Deborah's harassment had caused her so much stress that her doctor had prescribed anxiety medication. The Nguyens detailed how they'd almost given up and moved because they couldn't afford the accumulating fines on top of their mortgage. Dylan and Amanda talked about feeling unwelcome in their own neighborhood. I presented my documentation of the door lock incident, played the Ring doorbell audio of Deborah's 911 call, and showed photos of the misuse of emergency services citation she'd received. The room was stone silent except for a few gasps. Then Rebecca, who'd attended as my legal representative, took the floor. She presented our financial analysis, showing how more than $170,000 in HOA funds had gone to companies connected to Deborah over 3 years, all without competitive bidding or proper board approval. She detailed at least 15 violations of Texas Property Code, in how Deborah had assessed fines and threatened liens. She explained how the board had failed to maintain required policies and procedures. And she concluded by noting that every homeowner who'd been assessed fines without proper notice and hearing procedures had legal grounds to sue the HOA for the return of those funds plus damages. Deborah tried to defend herself, but her arguments were incoherent and desperate. She claimed everything was legal, that she'd had attorney approval for all her actions, that homeowners just didn't understand how HOAs worked. She insisted she'd never personally profited, even when confronted with documentation showing checks from the HOA to her company. She actually said, at one point, "I've dedicated 6 years to maintaining the quality of this neighborhood, and this is the thanks I get?" The meeting concluded with a vote. Tom moved for the immediate recall of all 3 board members and the appointment of an interim board to oversee a forensic audit of HOA finances. The vote was 58 in favor, 3 opposed. Deborah and her two board allies, who owned 5 properties among them. Under Texas law and our HOA bylaws, the recall was valid. Deborah was no longer HOA president. She stood up, her face bright red, and screamed, "You people have no idea what you've done! I will sue every single one of you for defamation. I will make your lives hell. I own this neighborhood." Tom, in his calm engineer voice, said, "No, Deborah, you don't. You never did. You own 4 houses, and you had temporary authority as board president, which you abused, and now you have neither." Deborah grabbed her papers and stormed out, but not before turning to me and saying, "This is all your fault. You're going to regret moving here." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner. But we're standing up now, and you're done." The aftermath unfolded over the next 4 months, and it was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. The interim board hired an independent CPA to audit the HOA's finances, and the results were damning. In addition to the obvious conflicts of interest, the audit revealed that Deborah had been writing checks to herself for administrative expenses without board approval, totaling another $27,000 over 3 years. She'd also been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses, restaurants, shopping, even a vacation to Cabo, and coding them as HOA business. In total, the audit found approximately $89,000 in misappropriated funds. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA president or board member who completely abused their authority? What was the most absurd violation you've ever been cited for? Have you ever had to fight back against selective enforcement or harassment from your HOA? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the stories you all share are even crazier than what I experienced. If this story of watching an HOA tyrant face actual criminal charges for her power trip gave you that sweet satisfaction of justice served, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and tells YouTube to show these stories to more people who need to hear them. And if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Trust me, tomorrow's tale is going to make this one look tame. Speaking of HOA board members who massively overestimate their authority and underestimate the homeowners they're targeting, tomorrow I'm bringing you a story that'll have you on the edge of your seat. Picture this: an HOA Karen who decided that her neighbor's fence was 6 inches over the property line. She was absolutely certain of it, told everyone in the neighborhood that her neighbor was stealing her land, filed official complaints, and demanded the fence be moved immediately at the neighbor's expense. What she didn't count on was that her neighbor was a retired civil engineer who knew exactly how to read property surveys, and when he hired a professional land surveyor to prove the fence was exactly where it should be, they discovered something absolutely explosive. The actual property line proved that Karen herself had been encroaching on 3 different neighbors' properties for more than a decade, including building her prized garden shed 2 feet onto someone else's land and paving part of her driveway on public easement. The surveyor's report triggered a domino effect of legal nightmares for this woman that included forced property removal, adverse possession claims, easement violations, and ultimately a lawsuit that cost her more than $85,000 and forced her to literally tear down structures she had built on land she didn't own. Watching an HOA Karen's baseless accusation backfire so spectacularly that it exposed years of her own property theft is the kind of karma that'll have you literally cheering out loud. This story has boundary disputes, legal technicalities, dramatic survey reveals, and an ending so satisfying you'll want to watch it twice. It drops tomorrow at the same time, and you absolutely cannot miss this one. Make sure you are subscribed with that notification bell on, because this is going to be one of the most watched stories on the channel. See you tomorrow for the saga of the fence that proved Karen was the real property thief all along.